Welcome everyone, Christine here on Series Gaming with my Mana Tombs dungeon guide for World of Warcraft the Burning Crusade Classic on both heroic and normal difficulties. On normal, this is one of the instances that you could do while leveling, but honestly I recommend you do it once you're 68 plus. That's because it is one of the harder dungeons in the game. And on heroic, it is one of the most difficult dungeons in the entire damn game. Other difficult dungeons, though, like Alcatraz or Shattered Halls, actually are not worth doing on Heroic unless you're doing like Trials of the Naru, but outside of that, they're not generally worth doing on Heroic because outside of the epic items, they don't really give you much. I mean, yes, the gems, the badges, and the epic items are all worth it, but is it really worth going through something like Alcatraz Heroic for the epics that drop there? Honestly, for many people, probably not, or once they've sorted everything out. For Mana Tombs Heroic, however, you want to do it because it has a different loot table than it does on normal, completely different loot table, so there's quite a few useful items. If you're a warrior tank, you want to do this because 2 of your best in slot pre-raid items, and in fact, 1 item that you'll be using for quite a long time, a ring, drop from this place. My recommendation, however, is to bring a range-focused group, to have a mage, to have a priest or a paladin for shadow resistance. Actually, having resistance auras in general is going to be very useful in this particular dungeon. It is difficult, it is not to be trifled with, and Mana Tombs is a very annoying dungeon to deal with. In fact, for many people, it would probably be the hardest dungeon heroic that they'll be dealing with, just because they don't have to care outside of Trials of the Naru for things like Alcatraz or Shattered Halls. I guess people will be doing Mechanar, but honestly, Mechanar is difficult in parts, the second and third and final boss, but Mechanar doesn't compare to the obnoxious difficulty of Mana Tomb. As you enter the instance, you'll be dealing with the Raiders, Scavengers, and Sorcerers. The groups aren't too difficult, you just want to be careful about how you pull them, because there's quite a few mobs in the room. The Raiders have a tendency to charge people, the Sorcerers summon adds, and the Scavengers lose aggro, have a tendency to lose aggro and go after your healer. So just be careful with that, especially with the Scavengers, because they can be quite nasty. You should always kill the Sorcerers first. Anyway, you then get to the first boss after you clear the room, Pandemonious. He does a lot of damage, and it is, interestingly, shadow damage, or should be shadow damage, and it can be very high. On top of that, he also gets a spell reflect, or a reflect ability. I think hunters aren't really affected by it, from what I've been able to glean. Hunters should be able to keep DPSing, but for everyone else, and this is what really wipes a lot of groups here, for everyone else, you really need to stop casting, and you really need to stop doing damage. The tank might be fine doing it, because obviously tanks are not necessarily going to do a lot of damage, so they're not really going to kill themselves doing it. But for melee, for casters, there's a lot of opportunities to kill yourself here. On top of that, he has a knockback that also does a lot of damage. I remember on retail that with him, you would want to actually kite him, or even as a tank, move out of the way, get the fuck away from him as quickly as possible, just because he was so nasty. But with any reasonable level of gear, you should be fine. Then you get more packs. Now, as before, it's really about being careful and not overpulling, and being careful with the patrols. Here you start getting priests. Now, the priests will heal for quite a bit, so you either want to CC them or focus them down first. I'd say probably CCing them is the smarter idea, so you can focus on the Sorcerers. First take those out, and then deal with the Raiders and the other mobs. The priests, though, are fairly annoying just because the sheer amount of healing that they do. The Sorcerers and their adds can really ruin your day, however. So just be mindful of that. You want to stick to the right as you're entering here, and you want to get some of the patrols in the room, and you will eventually get these Nexus Terrors. Now, these Terrors, they can do some annoying damage, but the main threat here is that they have an AoE fear. Tremor Totem is useful, maybe Grounding Totem really, and of course Berserking Rage, all that kind of stuff. If you're a warrior tank, you can use that. Now honestly here I didn't use it because I thought, okay, I have a Shaman, surely he's gonna drop Tremor Totem and that's gonna work. Didn't really go as planned, didn't it? Anyway, So you may want to clear the entire room if you're doing this on normal. If you're doing the escort quest, you want to clear everything here, just so you can have an easy time with the escort quest. You really don't want to leave mobs. On heroic, you probably don't want to care about too much about clearing this place out, or maybe you do, depending on what you want to do. There is apparently an enchant that drops from these guys, the priest in particular, so you might want to do it just for that, but for the most part, you're just going to want to stick to the right and clear the mobs along the way. Just be very careful and be mindful of the fact that the casters are the real danger, that the ads, the sorcerers are really dangerous, but obviously the other mobs are not exactly easy to deal with either. So anyway, you'll keep doing this and eventually you'll encounter some new mobs, the Dark Casters. Now these are actually even more dangerous than the sorcerers potentially. They are basically Shadow Priests. They have mana burn, so wonderful to get your healer screwed over by these guys. And on top of that, they can do quite a bit of damage. But really, the mana burn is the main threat with these guys. You probably want to kill them first over, honestly, anything else. Or crowd control them. Yes, crowd controlling them, killing the priests, dealing with sorcerers, all that kind of stuff. So the priority should probably be the Shadow Priest, followed by maybe the sorcerers or the priests with whatever you want. The Dark Casters, those should go down quickly. Because they also self-heal, so that makes them fairly annoying to deal with. Anyway, eventually you will reach the second boss. Now, I make this sound very easy, but understand it really isn't as easy as I make it sound, because there's a lot of potential for all of this to get out of control very quickly. Maybe someone fears some mobs, or a mob fears you and you pull more and you wipe. That can happen. That's actually one of the main reasons that Mana Tombs is so dangerous as an instance, beyond the abilities of the mobs, is that you have so many mobs clumped together, and if you pull a small group, you should be fine, but if you pull a big group, you're almost certainly going to wipe. So you need to be methodical, you need to be careful, you don't want things to get out of control. Anyway, you will get to the second boss, Tavrock. He does a lot of damage, he hits fairly fast, and he has some fairly nasty abilities. One of these is a frontal cleave that does a lot of damage. It's fairly important to have Curse of Weakness or Demo Shout or Screech from a hunter if he's using an owl pet, though that's unlikely to happen all that often. But anyway, reducing the attack power of this boss is quite important to deal with the cleave that hits for quite a bit. On top of that, he does an Earthquake that not only does reasonable amounts of damage, but also stuns you for 3 seconds. With a 6-second cooldown, according to WoWWiki. And that is pretty insane. So that means for about 50% of this fight, the tank is going to be stunned. And the tank is going to take a ridiculous amount of damage because of that. Because when you're stunned as a tank, you can't dodge, you can't block, you can't parry, you can't avoid attacks. And that means you're just going to take significantly higher damage. But finally, there is the final issue, which is that he casts an ability called Crystal Prison. Now, the way I'm looking at this is he's supposed to do this on a random target that shouldn't be the tank. Like, the way it works is that bosses have plenty of nasty abilities that they shouldn't use on the tank, because more often than not, if they do, they'll kill you. They'll wipe the party or the raid. The problem is that they do these abilities, at least on this private server, and on other private servers we have to wait and see when it comes to Classic. The way they do it here is they cast it based on who's at the top of the threat list. And because the tank is getting stunned so often, and range DPS, if they're standing at max range out of Earthquake or not, it is quite very possible for range DPS, especially with weaker gear, to do more aggro than the tank. The tank gets Crystal Prison, and he gets splattered all over the floor. This is actually something that happened. Now, I take responsibility for this. I didn't use Demo Shot, Thunderclap, all that, and I'm also playing fairly poorly here, having not played the Warrior for quite a lot of months. But still, it is an issue that you should be aware, and the way to deal with it is just watch the threat meter. Have a threat meter, watch it, don't go over the tank, because you will pay the price for it. After you deal with him, and he might genuinely be a roadblock that you can't get past, after him, you will deal with new mobs. Mana leeches first off, that explode when you kill them, so you don't want to kill them all at the same time. Just take your time, kill them one by one, let the healer heal people up, and then take them all down. Just don't AoE. As long as you're not blowing all of them up at the same time, you should be fine. Because if you blow them up at the same time, you might wipe. After that, more of the same mobs, mostly the same mobs that you've been dealing with before. Priests, terrors, all that kind of stuff. But you also have several new mobs, dangerous ones. Nexus Stalkers, which are rogues, they use gouge, they use poisons, they hit for a decent amount of damage. Furious, which are basically fire mages in a way. They use blast wave, they have melee strike, so they hit for more damage. And they use polymorph, fairly annoying to deal with, but not really the main danger either. The main danger are the Spellbinders. The reason behind this is that the Spellbinders are basically an improved version of the Sorcerers. Whereas the Sorcerers summon weak adds that just do an arcane explosion, the Spellbinders summon ethereal wraiths, which do shadow bolt volleys, which if you have multiple of these wraiths at the same time, and you have packs with 2 of these Spellbinders, you can get 4 of these wraiths at the same time, you're likely going to wipe very damn quickly. It is pretty crazy. That's actually what we wiped to on the clip at the beginning of this video. So they're fairly nasty to deal with. This is why you need to CC. This is why you need to keep these mobs under control, why you need to avoid pulling too many of them, because things can get out of control. In fact, for many groups starting out, you might get stuck on either a second boss or get stuck after him. Clearing after him might not be worth it for a lot of groups. But anyway, you will fight your way through more rooms, through more corridors, and eventually reach the final boss. Just be careful with the Spellbinders, prioritize them, stun them, CC them, doesn't matter what you're using, just don't let them summon the Wraiths, because that will wipe you very quickly. Keep the Furious away from your group so they don't blast wave everyone, and you should be mostly fine. Annoying, but fine. And after dealing with all of that, all of these annoying mobs, all of those annoying bosses, you end up dealing with Nexus-Prince Shaffar, who probably is the hardest thing in this instance, depending on your group setup. Strongly recommend having range DPS to deal with him and having burst DPS. You want to nuke him down as quickly as possible. He starts with free adds, free beacons, which will summon extra adds, and he'll keep summoning these beacons, so you want to deal with them as quickly as possible. Basically, the way the fight works is you want to kill the adds because they can do a lot of damage, and you can get quite a lot of them very quickly, while at the same time trying to nuke the boss. The same boss that is going to Frost Nova your tank and start casting spells that do a lot of damage on said tank. So there's a lot of damage going around the fight. It's fairly difficult for any tank to pick up the adds, to also have aggro on the boss, and you just want to do as much damage as possible while keeping threat on him as much as possible. He uses Frost Novas. He does actually quite reasonable melee damage as well. He uses Frost Nova, Fireballs, Frost Bolts, all that kind of stuff, and he summons a lot of adds. I guess the way to view him, in a sense, would probably be in some way a miniature version of Moro, with everything that implies. He is absolutely difficult. And if everything else in the dungeon can be done by a reasonably geared group without too many issues, some problems here and there, maybe you mispulled some trash, all that, if you're not careful, all that kind of stuff. But if you're careful, you should be able to handle most of the stuff in the instance fine, right? Except for the DPS checks, the gear checks that every single boss in this instance is. And with that, you will have cleared Mana Tombs if you manage to deal with him. There is an optional boss, but that's not really worth talking about, because that optional boss is a joke in comparison to pretty much everything else. Not a complete joke. One shouldn't underestimate anything in Mana Tomb's heroic, but honestly, compared to the final boss, compared to the second boss, the first boss, the trash, the Spellbinders, the adds from the Spellbinders, every nightmare that that is unleashed in this place, it is a vacation to deal with that optional boss. And that is it. One of the hardest heroics in the Burning Crusade, and actually one of the harder dungeons. And the thing about Mana Tombs, as I've said, the thing about Mana Tombs is that unlike other difficult heroics which you can skip, because many of the other difficult heroics are dungeons that basically are level 70 normals upscaled to heroic, like Shattered Holds, Arcatraz, all that. You can't really do that with Mana Tombs. Mana Tombs has important items that you can't just skip, so enjoy dealing with this. I recommend putting it off until the last moment, basically doing it last. just to have an easy time. And honestly, bring a guild group. You will regret trying to do this in a pug early on when Burning Crusade launches. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.